Hi, I'm Martha McFarland. My father Dan and I run Hawkeye Buffalo and Cattle Ranch in northeast Iowa. We have a grazing operation where we have about 100 acres that bison roam in woods and timber and in prairie. And then we also raise some polled Hereford cattle, those are beef cattle, on about 20 acres. We have a cow-calf operation, which means that we have mamas who raise up little babies, and then every year we'll sell the babies to people who are interested in raising cattle. If you're looking for some heifers to start your herd, or if you're looking for a bull for your herd. Is where my father was born. He is 89 years old today, and I just live down the road. And then in the 1990s, the beef industry was just not doing very well. People weren't getting the prices that they wanted to for their animals, and that was when the family decided to start raising bison. It was a way that we could keep our woods and our trees and earn an income in addition to the beef, diversifying and doing something a little different, really help our operations. So if one place isn't making a ton of money because of the market around us, then we have an opportunity to kind of adapt, and we have income streams in other areas. Anyway, so these are our Hereford bulls. We have both the bulls and the mamas, which of course we keep separate. And the bulls, as I was mentioning before, are breeding stock. That means if you were interested in raising some cattle, then you could come buy a bull from me to keep a herd of cows. And in the mix, we also end up every year taking one or two of the smaller animals, and those we turn into steers so that we can have a little grass-fed beef. One of the reasons we decided to start having the beef as well as bison is a bison takes about 3 times as long as a conventional corn-fed beef to come to market. So what that means is that bison meat is more expensive than beef. Our grass-fed beef is somewhere in between. Raising animals on grass can be tricky because it takes 2 years instead of 1 year to really get it up and ready to go to market. But the advantages are you as a farmer, I get paid more to raise grass-fed beef. Of course, we also love our pastures, and I think that that's important. Also, a lot of people are interested in grass-fed beef because of the health benefits. So it kind of just depends on who you are and what you like. Some people are used to corn-fed, and corn-fed is really fatty. It's got a lot of fat in it, and some people love that marbling, and that's the flavor that they're used to. But if you ever get a chance to try grass-fed beef, I really recommend it, because a lot of people will eat our burger and they will just say, oh my gosh, that's the best burger I've ever had. It's much leaner, so you have to be careful sometimes not to dry out or to overcook the meat. But it also is very popular with athletes and people who are interested in that extra bump in terms of nutrition and leaner meat. So ideally what we would be doing is having even a little bit smaller pastures. Hi boys, how are you doing? Yeah, so ideally what we would have is a small enough space that when the animals come in, they graze it almost like you would see a mower coming through. You kind of want this even. And if you look at our grasses here, the animals have gotten some spots, but they're missing others. But that's because we don't have very many animals right now in this pasture, but these are all the bulls that we have. So a lot of grazers who are more efficient with their grasses will come in and actually make daily moves. So they'll put up temporary fencing and they'll start and they'll just work their way back. Now the advantage to doing that is you can end up with like twice as much, 3 times more grass than you would get if you weren't forcing them to like eat a smaller space and then taking them off of that. That's really how you get just the very best pastures that you would want. However, for us and for our operation and all the other things that we have going on and how busy we are, moving these animals daily is just like not in the mix for us this summer. So what we do with these boys is we just let them out here and they'll eat what they want, and then by the time you know, they're hitting some of these bigger spots, some of these little spots will be coming in. But you'll notice that I have more weeds than some people do in their pastures, and that's because we're continuously grazing instead of rotating the bulls. So polled Hereford cattle actually are derived from Hereford cattle, and all Hereford cattle have horns. And what happened was at the turn of the century, in the 1900s, early 1900s, there was a man named Gammon, that was his last name, and he went around the country looking for all the animals, that had had this like genetic trait where they hadn't had horns. And that was the foundation for the polled Hereford breed. But because all of those animals genetically are came from horned animals, every so often you'll get animals in the mix where that recessive gene instead of that dominant gene comes out. And that's what we have with one of our bulls over there, is he ended up with that. And there's another one, number 70, who is one of our steers. Because of that, we didn't want him to be a breeding bull. He has what we just call skurs, which are these like kind of little weird horns. Like they came out a little bit. So yeah, a couple in our mix have that. But most of all the animals that we have don't have any horns. All right, so we have moved across the road now into our bison pasture. So this is about 30 acres in this area here where the bison can roam around. One of the big differences between raising beef and raising bison is that bison really like that elbow room. People hear about bison and some people might think that they're mean or aggressive. You might have heard crazy stories of crazy people out in Yellowstone who are getting way, way, way too close to the wild animals. The thing about bison is they still really are wild, even though that they're under my care. But a bison's personality is more like a deer than it is, I would say, like any other creature. So with my cattle, I can get in close, I can put them in smaller spaces, and they're just kind of chill and they're relaxed about things. Bison, you can have like a bottle baby or something where you train it and you get it and you kind of keep it and it's really used to you, and you might be able to get close to that animal. But when you do that, it's also kind of sad for those bottle babies, because then they don't even know like how to interact with the other animals in the herd. The really like big difference between raising bison and raising beef is that the beef have been around people for all that time, right? So they're chill, but they also really need our help. Bison, on the other hand, have only been raised by farmers and ranchers like myself for like the last 150 to 200 years. So because of that, they still have that wild instinct. So what that means for me with my cattle is that in the spring with the cattle, with the Herefords, every single day I need to go out and I need to check on those animals just to make sure that mama doesn't need help calving. But with bison, you just don't even think about it. They take care of things themselves, just like they would in the wild. With our cattle, you have to separate the cows from the bulls, otherwise you're going to end up with babies in the middle of January, and babies in the middle of January can freeze to death. But bison, we leave the cows and the bulls and all the mix of ages all together in a group, and they just have an instinct and they know. They go into a rut, just like deer go into a rut, meaning this is the time to start thinking about babies, and the babies always just come in the spring. So that is like one of the advantages to raising bison. Is my job as a rancher is to make sure they have really good fencing, because just like a deer, they can actually hop a fence. A cow can be in a pasture with a fence that's like as tall as my waist, and that cow is not going to jump out of my pasture. But the bison can actually jump a 6-foot fence if they really want to. So what we do is we just make sure with both our Herefords and our Herefords and our bison, we always keep an electric fence, and that electric fence is always hot. But with bison, you just have to be extra careful to make sure that you have good fences. I spend a lot of time thinking about that, but I don't spend a lot of time worrying about the health of the bison. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about taking care of the bison, because the bison have this wild instinct and really do a good job taking care of themselves. ask me, like, is it easier raising bison or is it easier raising cattle? And just what we were talking about, like with bison having a wild instinct and taking care of themselves, I would say 360 days of the year, bison are easier to raise. I have to pay attention to my cattle. I don't really have to pay attention to my bison. But then when it comes time to sort out the animals, when you have to work the animals, once a year we take the bison across the road to the sorting facility. And what we do is we always make sure they get a wormer. It's really important with bison because that's one thing they haven't evolved to have a resistance to parasites. Because thousands of years ago, an animal would come through here, they would graze it, but then they wouldn't return to that area. And it's returning to the same area that's been grazed is how parasites are spread. So we always give them a wormer, and then we'll separate off the animals that we are going to sell for the year. And that becomes the adventure because you're bringing these animals who like elbow room into a small, tight, enclosed space. And I have had a big bull like we have back there jump a fence this high because he was in a small enclosed space because he was going to go be a bull for another family. And yeah,
how much do they weigh?
They weigh less than cattle generally, like because they're super efficient animals and there's actually a lot of hair. If you look at that big bull, it's actually got about a foot of hair as part of it. It's got a big head, but then it's got the big hair on top of it. So a big bull would typically weigh just about 2,000 pounds maybe. And our cows are probably weighing in around 1,600 at the most.
Okay.
Our bison cows. You say cow for bison as well. So these guys that you see here scientifically are actually called bison. And of course we just shorten that to bison. The reason it's bison is because historically bison have actually been around since the Ice Age. So there are versions of bison that are actually about 3 times bigger than the bison you see today that were living during the time of the Ice Age, called bison antiquus, that have since died off. And now we have bison, which is the smaller version. But we often refer to bison as buffalo. And the reason for that is it's a historic misnomer. Kind of like what we have historically referred to Native Americans as Indians, even though they're not from India. French fur traders were some of the first people from Europe to come through this area, and they would call the bison les bœufs. Now, my French accent isn't very good, but that means beef in French. And some people heard buff and thought it meant buffalo and started calling them buffalo. Scientifically, a buffalo is actually a water buffalo or a Cape buffalo that you would see in Africa or you would see in Asia. So we still use the term buffalo, but we try to say American buffalo just so there's no confusion. The main concern is that there are some stores that might be selling buffalo at the grocery, and you are actually eating water buffalo and not bison, which is why you're starting to see a lot more people say bison instead of American buffalo. All right, so around the farm, if you look around our fence lines, what you'll see is an above ground water line. And this is what we used once we took 100 acres of pasture and we divided it into smaller spaces to get those good grasses going, like we were talking about. So what we have is just a hydrant here at the farm that has all the hoses connected, and then we have 2 water lines that are going out and all of the fitting around it. This is the valve that we can use to shut off the water if we decide we don't want to be using that tank. But what happens is that we have this pipeline going out thousands and thousands of feet. It's just above ground and it follows the fence line. And then there's an area kind of similar to this with an attachment and a hose down where we have a tire tank, and that feeds the tire tank. And then there's the Job float in the tire tank, which is a Job float is something that will automatically sense, kind of like in the back of your toilet. It will sense when the water is full, and it'll kick in and it'll shut off the water so that the water tank never overflows. What I have here is a self-selecting mineral feeder. So one of the really cool things about animals, this is true of cattle and this is true of bison, is that you can put out all the different minerals that they might need, and they will choose the ones that are most important to them. So you can feed animals just like a sack of mineral and a sack of salt, and that mineral is like a multivitamin. Now that's great and it does just a fine job, and we do that with our cattle. But we decided with our bison that we wanted to bump it up a notch, give them something a little bit extra. So what we have are that multivitamin mineral split out into all the different minerals that are in it. So for instance, what I have here is vitamin K. So I'm going to pour the vitamin K in, and then the bison, if they're feeling like they want some vitamin K, will be able to eat that without getting, and they can eat as much K as they want without getting too much of one of the other minerals that they might not need, like copper or like sulfur. And in doing that, then they have, basically we had a higher birth rate. That was one of the big reasons we decided to do it. It just gave them shinier coats. It was just kind of all those extra nutrients of exactly the formula that they needed.